right. Well, while I do my little intro, I'll leave the photos up, but after that, I'll go ahead and stop the share so you guys can take over and be the stars of the show. Sound good? All right. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very excited to be chatting with Don Pierson and Fred Jackson about the history of the Deerpath golf course. A little bit of just regular Zoom rules as we get into this. Once I stop the screen share, you can view our speakers by selecting the button at the top right of your screen that says speaker view. There'll be a speaker view option. Also, if I have not already done so for you, if you could please mute your microphones during the program. This will cut down on any feedback or ambient noise. And then at the end of the program, there'll be an opportunity to unmute and ask questions. We're anticipating a lot of really great stories for the programs. So we hope that there will be time for everyone's questions at the end of the program. But if we run out of time and your question does not get answered, I'm going to put my email in the chat box, and you can go ahead and email me, Alexandra Schneider, and I will go ahead and direct your question where it needs to go. And before we get started, I just want to say a quick but very sincere thank you to Maddie Dugan for making our Zoom programs possible, and of course to all of you for joining us here this evening. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share. And here we go. And I want just to, again, turn this over to Don Pierson and Fred Jackson, who are going to take it away as our featured speakers on the history of the Deerpath Golf Course. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Alex. First thing I want to tell you is Fred and I have been friends for a long time, but we don't live in the same house. So you may be wondering why we're speaking from the same room. We had a technological glitch, so we share a golf cart once in a while, so we don't worry about that.
Fred Jackson and
Don Pierson.
I don't know.
He's an old writer for the Tribune.
Oh.
Alex, can you mute the audience? Are you able to do that?
Yes, I am trying to track that down right now. Again, if any of you are not muted, if you would please mute yourselves. If I can't find you, just to make sure that we don't have any extra sound cutting in, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. My name is Don Pierson, and I was a sports writer for the Chicago Tribune. But really, the highlight of my career was to serve on the recreation board at Lake Forest for a while, many years ago. And in introducing Fred Jackson, the first thing you need to know was that he was the third baby born at Lake Forest Hospital. That might be all you need to know.
That means I'm old.
Now I mean the old hospital now, not the new one. He's outlasted the old hospital, and we're certainly thankful for that. Fred's a third generation Lake Forester. His grandfather was the gardener at the Cyrus McCormick estate. His dad was a mailman, and Fred started working at the rec center at age 15 when it was a second floor gym behind the old Marshall Fields in Market Square.
Right.
And he was executive director of the rec department for 38 years. So he really is the personification of Lake Forest history. Tonight, we're going to hear him talk about the history of Deerpath Golf Course and the history of what he likes to refer to as the not yet memorial Fred Jackson Golf Tournament. And that celebrates its 20th year on June 4th. I also want to say, although he's talking about golf tonight, that Fred's input on Lake Forest public recreation is so widespread, it's impossible to live in this town without appreciating what he's done, from Kinder Haven preschool to Dickinson Senior Center. Fred's objective always has been to provide diverse programs to benefit all ages. So the golf course wasn't always under the recreation department's auspices. There used to be a separate parks board, but since Parks and Recreation were combined under Fred, Deerpath enjoyed the benefit of his leadership and continues to do so through Friends of the Parks and Rec. So Fred, we're lucky to have you. And with that, let's get started with the obvious question for anybody, even if they don't play golf, anybody that drives down Deerpath Road these days wants to know what is going on.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction, Don. Yeah, let's, I'm sure most people have questions about the construction that's going on and how it affects the golf course. First of all, understand that it's not a golf course project. It is really a public safety project. Most people who've lived here for a while remember the flooding under the underpass at 41. The city's been talking about trying to solve that problem for over 10 years. And finally, the state of Illinois was willing to come up with some funding and create a project that will alleviate that safety issue. I mean, remember when that flooded, it was as high as some of the cars that would drive through there, and you couldn't get an ambulance from the east side of town to the hospital, fire trucks, public safety, and so forth. So that was the major concern. So it's really a public safety project to alleviate the flooding under 41. The city agreed as part of that project, state asked to build 2 retention ponds on the golf course. And as best I can tell you, and I would suggest anybody who wants more information, call Public Works and talk to them, because I spent 2.5 hours with them and I'm not sure I quite understand the whole thing yet. But there are 2 ponds, 2 detention ponds. One is located, I would say, west of the entrance to the golf course. That pond is going to be fed by gravity. And some people, particularly people around there, remember there were pilings that were driven across the street into an area where, I don't know if the old timers know, but there used to be a train station there, believe it or not. So that water will go into where those pilings are driven, down below the level of Deerpath Road, and will flow under Deerpath Road into that detention pond. So that pond will be gravity fed. When the water collects in that pond, it is sent through a series of pipes around the golf course, through the parking lot, to the other pond, which is located near the first hole, or really the east of the 2 ponds. When that is filled, and that will be filled so from pond number 1, and it also will be filled with water that'll be pumped into it. Then when the creek goes down, pipes from that pond will empty into the creek. So all the water from under the viaduct will be either fed into pond number 1 or pumped into pond number 2. It'll be held there till the creek goes down, and there'll be pipes underground that will then feed into the creek. So the idea is that those ponds will just hold water while we're hopefully solving the problem with under 41. Importantly, I think it's really not going to affect golf long-term. Short-term, it has. The 17th hole has been shortened temporarily to a par 3 with a temporary green. That green will be rebuilt, and so it'll be back to a par 4. And the 18th tee has been moved up. I don't think some of us old timers don't care about shortening distance, but right now it's a shorter hole, and that tee will be rebuilt. So that the course will be back in condition. And the other thing I think it's important is that the way it looks right now, the ponds are about to be turned back to the city, and there is a significant amount of money that's been provided by the state for landscaping the 2 ponds. I'm told by the director of parks that this will end up looking better than it ever has with the amount of landscaping that they do around the ponds. So That's basically to solve the flooding problem. Understand though, that Deerpath Golf Course still remains a floodplain. And its purpose is to be able to pass water from all the way out of almost Waukegan Road. Everything goes east and through under the tracks, through the golf course, and ends up in that creek. And so when there's ever flooding, the golf course will still probably be underwater for a short period of time. But this project will solve the problem of the underpass of 41.
It sounds like a short course in civil engineering.
Yeah, right. Trust the engineers.
Well, in addition to that construction, though, there also is construction going on the golf course itself. And would you talk about that a little bit? And Alex, I think you could maybe put up the picture of the lawn.
Yeah, Don, that's the Friends of Parks and Recreation, we'll talk about a little bit later, 501c3 group, has partnered with Kemper Sports, who are currently been contracted to manage the golf course. And the two bodies basically came up with a concept that's referred to as the lawn. It is a 30,000 square foot putting and chipping course that will be built starting probably in July this year and be ready for play next year. This is be the first of its kind in the area. Some of the major courses in the world have these little courses, and so what it will do is allow the junior program, which is huge at Deerpath, to use it for practice and instruction. It also, when there are outings, people can warm up by their chipping and putting on this area, and perhaps even entertain little games afterwards. So this is a $400,000 project funded entirely by donations through the Friends of Parks and Recreation. Construction to begin in July, and hopefully ready to play next spring.
And we'll have no excuse for our short game anymore, right?
Yeah, we'll all have excuses, but I don't know if this will be one of them.
Well, to answer an earlier question, Deerpath began in 1926, so you'd have to be at least 100 years old and have a very good memory to recall when there wasn't a golf course out there. But could you tell us a little about the origin of the golf course?
Yeah, from what I have read, and I wasn't here then, but I missed the first 20 years or so, but been here for the rest of the time. From what I understand and what I've read, there were a group of residents were very interested in having a public golf course. And they petitioned the city council, and actually three families in Lake Forest came forth and donated the land for the Deerpath Golf Course, with the provision that it's to always be used for recreational purposes. And so this group got together and petitioned the city. They said they would raise so much money to operate it. And in 1926, I believe, or 27, this group got together. I was reading some of the names, and maybe some of the old timers would be familiar with this committee. Golf committee was Carl Kraft, Alex Perry, Phil Spidell, who's an old time man, John Griffith, and they formed a committee, decided to make rules on etiquette and membership, establish a fee, and we're going to be basically responsible for maintenance of the golf course. The fee, you'd be interested at that time, they decided they needed at least 300 members. So they took pledges from people, and the fee for an adult male was $20. Today, the fee is $1,485. So we've come a long way. The stories I've been told is that they built the golf course, and there were some pictures I think that we showed earlier of that construction. A second 9 was added shortly after that. the story that I was told, and you know, sometimes these stories get embellished over time, so I'm not sure you can believe everything I say.
Tonight you can.
Yeah, tonight you can, but I was told that the sludge from the sanitary district was brought in by horse-drawn wagons and spread all over the back nine. For a year or two, they had the finest green grass that you can possibly imagine. And it was said that the old timers said when they hit a bad shot, took a big divot, they'd say, "Oh crap!" And they weren't far from reality. I think it was far from the truth. But secondhand was so it became an 18-hole golf course at that point, and then successfully continued on until what we see today.
We talked earlier about do we know who designed the course? Because for 1926, it seems to me to be a pretty advanced course, and even, I mean, it holds up today as one of the finer municipal courses on the North Shore.
You know, I don't think I have the name. I thought it was someone called Peary, but I don't know for sure. The architect. But they did bring in a golf professional to run the course, and they've had a good history of professionals who have run the course, and certainly the maintenance people as well who have maintained it. So it was a well-designed floodplain, and you know, there's a theme through the last 95 years of the course of philanthropy, starting with the donation of the land itself, leading up to today, the lawn project that we just talked about. And in between, a lot of donations, a lot of support by the public. Very few tax dollars have gone into the operation or the construction of the golf course.
Wasn't one of the objections that it was so far west?
Yeah. That was Westlake Forest. West Park was west, I guess, too. There were objections, and the objections mostly were that this was for a select number of people and wasn't going to benefit the entire community. But that was quickly put down by the city council when they went to a couple other neighboring communities who had golf courses and realized that, like all good public recreation facilities, it does two things. It brings new people into the community, and it increases the value of property. So those naysayers were quickly quieted, and it really received a big support from the community.
Well, now, it's easy to understand how any kind of recreation prospered in the Roaring '20s. Did it struggle through the Depression and the war, or what happened in the 30s and 40s?
Well, it like everything else, you know, I think it struggled, but it survived. And when it came out after the war, it really took off. Golf in the 50s and 60s and 70s really became very popular. In fact, the community, the businesses in town used to close down on Wednesday at noon, including the bank. There was only one bank at that time. And everybody would close down and everybody would go to play golf. It was, you couldn't get a tee time on a Wednesday afternoon because the courses were absolutely packed. So it became very successful. I think part of that was too also the number of the professionals that we had that were running the golf course. It made a big difference. When I remember when I was young, which was some time ago, but I can remember it was so popular that people would register for tee times or permanent tee times, you know, on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock or whatever. But they would line up in the parking lot, in fact, bring in a camper and stay in the camper for a day or two so they could be first in line to get a tee time. That's not the case today. And in fact, I think we switched it to having a lottery, so we alleviated that kind of thing. But there were lots of wild parties in the parking lot for a couple of days before tea times.
Well, golf has always been a gentleman's sport, and of course, Deerpath golfers are always on their best behavior, right? Fred, are there stories about some of the early golfers besides the people that would camp out in the parking lot?
Yeah, that's probably what I enjoy most about working for recreation and in the community is hearing some of the stories. And again, some of them are a little embellished. My father was a big storyteller, and I found out some of those things he told me that I believed were not true. But there have been stories that were handed down for some time, and I think it's worthwhile talking about. First of all, let me tell you also when I talk about the pros. One of the professionals that we had for a number of years was a guy named Don Kennedy, terrific guy. But what's interesting about Don is that Don Kennedy went to Waukegan High School and graduated in 1948. He played golf on the team there. And there were two of the other members of the team were Hubby Hudgen, who was a pro at Awencia for many years, and a fellow named Joe Dopchick, who was also a professional but in Kansas. So those three pros, and the fourth player was Gene Dannenberg, who was president of the Midwest Bank for a number of years in Lake Forest. The pros used to say all the time that Gene was the best golfer because as the president of the bank, he got to play more golf than any of the pros did. And also on that team was a local resident who still lives in Lake Forest and was quite a character. His name is Hercules Zagoras. Don and I have played with him a few times. Herc was quite an individual and had some interesting routines. If people that play golf know that people will warm up on the first hole in different ways. Some of them will stretch and others will swing 4 or 5 times. Some will go to the driving range and putting green and practice and so forth. Well, Hercules had a theory that he stood on his head on the first tee. And his theory was if the blood rushed to his head, he would be a much better golfer. So that's a character that comes along every once in a while. And we played with him. I don't think we ever saw him stand on his head, but those stories have been handed down.
It worked because he was a very good golfer, very, very late in life, still is probably. And of course, I understand there's a rule that you're not allowed to throw clubs at Deerpath. Is that it?
Yeah, right. You're not, in those days, you couldn't get a drink and you couldn't throw a club, or you weren't supposed to anyway. But the story was, and I have to admit this was one of my relatives, but he had a reputation for throwing clubs. And so the story was he was on the 15th hole and hit a bad second shot, started yelling and screaming and threw his club and it stuck up in the tree. And he tried everything to get it down, shake the tree. He took his shoe off and threw it up in the tree and it didn't work. So they went on. He was too embarrassed to tell a pro or anybody. So the story is that about 10, 11 o'clock at night, he got his 10-year-old son, came back to the golf course. He made his son climb up the tree to get his club. And I think that cured him a little bit of club throwing for a while. But yes, there was another story that I thought was interesting, and this almost comes out of a movie. This gentleman was on the 17th hole, and which in those days went to Deerpath Road. The green was near Deerpath Road. And so he's probably about 50 yards out, and he hits his approach shot, and it's a line drive and goes over the green into the bushes. So he drops another ball, hits another one. This time it's into the trees over the green. Drops another ball. This one is over the trees, over Deerpath Road. And his playing partner said, "What kind of club are you using?" And he said, "Oh, I'm using an 8-iron. He said, "An 8-iron from 50 yards out? Why are you doing that?" He said, "Well, I just knew I could hit it. So I wanted to make sure I hit it solid." And there was also a story about that I enjoy with some of the old guys. As I said, Deerpath was dry. You could not get a drink. You weren't supposed to bring any alcohol and on the course. But a group of the old timers, of course, wanted to have a beverage when they played. So what they did is they drew down Laurel Avenue to the end of Laurel Avenue, took a case of beer and stuck it back in the woods, so that when they made the turn at the fifth or sixth hole, one guy would run back into the woods and grab a couple of beers, so they satisfied their thirst that way. I will also tell you a story about a ranger we had, a guy named Pete Besona. He was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. He was a terrific ranger. He had his way with convincing everybody to move along and do the right things. But Pete also liked to collect golf balls. He liked to, in his spare time, he'd be over in the woods picking up used balls. He was, as I say, he was a wonderful guy. Whenever you'd say, "How you doing, Pete?" He'd say, "Oh, I'm still hitting above ground." When he died, his funeral was at St. Mary's. So I went to the funeral, and when everybody left, they received a little plastic plastic bag with 5 used golf balls in it, and a note from Pete that said, "Everybody deserves a second chance in life." Finally, let me tell you one other story. This is my favorite story that's been handed down for years. Goes back quite a few years. And remember, there were not a lot of homes that were around Deerpath. It was just all wooded area. At one point, I think actually one of the golfers went to the city council and asked them not to allow people to shoot. They were shooting guns hunting on the golf course, and so they stopped doing that. So there weren't a lot of people around, a lot of homes. This guy had a horrible slice. He always hit the ball way to the right. And about the 5th hole, he hit his drive way back into the woods. So he went back looking for his ball. And the other 3 people waited and they waited and they waited. And Charlie was in the woods, and Charlie got lost in the woods. And so the other 3 guys finally just went on and played. Well, Charlie finally ends up, and remember, there were no homes back there, so it's all woods, finally comes out of the woods on Green Bay Road up near West Park. Fortunately, a cab drives by, and he flags down the cab, takes him back to the golf course. He joins the other 3 guys for the back 9. So Charlie got lost in the woods.
Oh, boy. Well, the Chicago Bears moved to Lake Forest in the mid-70s. And of course, they weren't very good then, but in the early 80s, they started playing in a city tournament, Chamber of Commerce tournament. And then shortly after they started playing, they won a Super Bowl. So maybe that had something to do with it. But can you tell us something about that chamber outing and how that got started?
Sure. I have a tendency once in a while to open my big mouth when I shouldn't, and I did. In this case, I did. I mentioned to, I think, the city manager at the time, and maybe even the mayor, that I didn't think the Bears were doing anything for the community. They moved to Hallis Hall. It's my neighborhood. All they were doing was speeding down the roads, and they didn't do anything for our kids or anything. So I realized that was probably a mistake, because next thing I was told is I was having breakfast with Jim Finks, who was the general manager of the Bears, and the city manager and the mayor. Jim Finks was just a wonderful guy, super guy. I was a little bit nervous about it, but we met for breakfast. He said, "Fred, I'll tell you what, make a list of 10 things that you want, and we'll meet next week, and we'll go over and see what I can do for you." So I went back and made a big list of 10 things that I thought the Bears could do for the community. One of them was to have a Bear golf outing with the Parks and Recreation Department, receiving all the benefits from it. Number 1 on the list was asking for 50 tickets to a Bears game take a busload of kids. So things met, and he said, "I can do anything you want on this list with one exception. I can't give you 50 tickets to a Bears game because Papa Hallis won't let me give away any tickets. But I thought maybe something would come of the golf outing. He was a tennis player and wanted to do a tennis tournament, but I said golf would make more sense. Well, anyway, the Bears did some stuff for us. They were great. They had Doug Plank, if some of you remember, came out and spoke to our senior citizens. Brian Cabral, who was a linebacker, came to our kids' sports camp and let the kids tackle him. So there was some benefit to it. But I was curious as to why I hadn't heard anything about the Chicago Bear Parks and Recreation Department golf tournament. And sure enough, about 2 or 3 weeks later, it was announced that the Chicago Bears and Chamber of Commerce are going to have a golf tournament with the proceeds going to the Chamber of Commerce. And when I went in and asked the city manager, why wasn't that our idea? He said, oh, I just thought the chamber needed the money more than you did. But that idea stuck with me always. There were some good events out there, some fun events. I played a number of times. I started out playing with a couple of Bears. I think there's a picture in there playing with Doug Buffone. But near the end, it lasted, I don't know how many years it lasted. And certainly after the 85 Bears, they all went their own separate ways. So we started playing with retired Bears and coaches. But I recall near the end, for some reason or other, they stuck me with the older mayors, retired mayors, the 80-year-old mayors. And I guess they thought because I know CPR, I could ride with them and everybody would be safe. So I was kind of a caddy and a first responder. It was my job. We went, one of the stories that we had, and Lord Almighty, this scared me. We were on the 17th hole, and these two retired mayors they hit their shot. One jumped out of the cart and was hitting his second shot. And the other mayor was trying to pull the cart forward, but instead of stepping on the brake, he stepped on the accelerator and he ran over the other mayor. The mayor is now trapped under the cart. His leg is under the fender and the wheel. I thought, oh my Lord, I said, he had to break his leg. So I ran over there and quickly my career was flashing before my eyes. I thought this might be the end of it. But I lifted up the cart and he got his leg out and he said, I'm all right, I'm okay. And happened to be in pretty good shape for an 80-year-old mayor and survived. But that was one of the funny stories. One other quick one I will tell you that I enjoyed and lived to regret for years is, well, I'll tell you that story later. It wasn't part of the Bears anyway.
It's part of the Jackson tournament?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a little about, there was a survey of players at some point and a lot of improvements that happened on the golf course.
Yeah. Well, when I took over as director of Parks and Recreation and the golf course was under me, I did what I thought was the most logical thing, was to have a survey of the golfers as to what they wanted, what they saw as good, what was bad. Two things came across overwhelmingly. One was the flooding, particularly not where most people see the flooding on the east part of the course. There was flooding on the west part of the course as well. And the other thing was the conditions of sand traps. We had built up a significant surplus of funds over the years. So we used those funds to basically do a very similar project that the state is doing now, only on the other end of the golf course. We built 2 ponds and water flows from one pond on the west and through a series of pipes to the other pond on the east, and then eventually empties into the creek. The second thing we did was we redo all the sand traps. We had to do the drains and sand trap because the water would stand in the traps for weeks or so. And it was a significant project. I think it was about, in those days, probably $800,000, but it worked. And so today, if you hit your ball in one of those ponds, you can blame me for it.
In the last 20 years, or sort of since the beginning of the Jackson tournament, in the early 2000s, there was a little decline in golf. It was called a game of twos. Can you explain what that meant and what the golf course, how the golf course addressed that decline in participants?
What the game of twos is that the game of golf is too hard to play. It takes too long, and it's too expensive. Now to counter all of those things, I think if you stop and think about what the recreation dollar is, going to a movie, going to a Cubs game, Bears game, whatever, it's really 4 hours or 5 hours on the golf course for the fee that you pay is really not any different than going to a major event. The too hard, we try to give lessons to people and give them the opportunity to learn the game better through the pros. And too long, can't do too much about it other than the Rangers moving things around. And also, Deerpath is one of the courses where if you play, you should be able to play that course in 4 hours. So it's really not a long day. But golf was declining at that time. Revenues were going down, and for the first time, I think we didn't have a surplus each year. So the city decided to basically outsource the management of the course, and they did with Kemper Sports. Local resident, Steve Skinner, head of Kemper Sports, had a real interest in making sure the golf course was the best around. And so they came in, I think in 2012, I'm told. I thought it was earlier than that, but I was told 2012. And they have managed it. They supply basically the professional, they supply all the maintenance staff, and then through a contract, the city pays them so much money. It's important to understand the city owns the golf course, or runs the golf course, and the Kemper just manages it. But it's made a difference. One of the things that they've done that's made a huge difference is developed a great youth program. There are over 200 young people playing golf in the youth program now. And in fact, some people refer to it as young person's golf course, kids golf course. But when we talked about the lawn earlier, that certainly will help with building the future, which is really our young people, because, in 5 or 10 years, those people are adults and they're paying and supporting the golf course.
Let's get to the Friends of Parks and Recreation and the Fred Jackson tournament. And by the way, I hope you've signed up, because Fred told me it is sold out. There'll be 36 foursomes, 2 on a hole. And so get in line for next year. But this started 20 years ago, and there's an interesting history about the very first one. So tell us about how this got started and whether it preceded Friends of the Parks or came out of Friends of the Parks.
Yeah, really the idea of a celebrity or a golf tournament that would create revenue for Parks and Recreation started with back the Chicago Bear Chamber golf outing. I had the idea, it's in my head, and I wanted to do something like that. So 20 some years ago, the first thing I was told is that we had to form a foundation so that people could donate and get tax benefits from it. So we formed the Friends of the Parks and Recreation. I got together with a couple of friends, and we petitioned the state, filled out the applications, and we became a 501c3 organization. When I was asked by the city manager at the time, what the heck are you going to do? I said, well, I know we can run a golf tournament. And that's one thing. We own the golf course. I know we can do that. So we decided to start with a golf tournament with the proceeds all going to the Parks and Recreation. The first tournament, though, was scheduled for 9/18/01. And if you'll think about back to that time, that's 1 week after 9/11. Not the best time to have a tournament. So the whole country, as you all remember, was up in arms at that point, and nobody really was too interested in playing golf. So we canceled the tournament. So we canceled the first tournament. However, it was one of our most profitable ones because except for one golfer, everybody said, keep the money, keep my fees. I don't care. I want to go to Parks and Recreation.
Are you going to identify that golfer, Fred?
I know who he is, but no. So we decided that two things. One is we were going to move it to June because one of the feedback we got was by September, everybody feels kind of golfed out with all these tournaments they run. So we decided to play the golf tournament on the first Friday in June. And it's been going on for 20 years. Now, sometime after the first few, my friends decided to call it the Fred Jackson Not Yet Memorial Golf Tournament. And I hope it continues to be that, frankly, for a few more years. But over the time, we have generated about $500,000 has been placed back into parks and recreation facilities. The Steve Malin baseball diamond, the Gary Kreischer batting cage, a basketball court, and a lot of things at the golf course were added as well. In the last couple of years, we put a lot of money into the golf course. There was a new golf course were purchased, a couple $100,000. A halfway house was built. So that has made me happy that we were able to find another source of revenue to support park and recreation facilities.
Talk a little more about the halfway house. As a frustrated golfer myself, I know that's redundant, but every frustrated golfer is in need of halfway houses, Fred.
Right.
But that halfway house demonstrates how you've been able to incorporate not only golf but other facets of recreation.
Right. The purpose for it when we design it and build it, and this is the Friends of Parks and Recreation did this. And then turned it over to the city. The idea was obviously the most obvious one is to provide bathrooms at the halfway through the golf course, so that people didn't have the porta potties or had to wait until they got back to the clubhouse. So that was clearly number one. But we also added a couple other features because there are people who cross-country ski in the wintertime out there. So the idea was that people could stop there, use that. There's a fireplace in it as well. We thought maybe groups would be able to use it for various events. I had always kind of considered that we should be using the golf course for 12 months a year. Many years ago, the Rotary Club donated a toboggan hill. And I think there were a couple of pictures of it. And when I managed that, I had this grand idea that we were going to be able to rent out cross-country skis and do all kinds of neat things in the winter. But the toboggan slide ended up, I think the ambulance was called about every 30 minutes. So I said, that's not going to work. And the clubhouse was too cold to serve hot chocolate. So that didn't work. That's been torn down. But I still have that concept, and I think we do, that if we can use it halfway around. There's a trail, a jogging trail that goes behind the golf course. So the idea was that maybe people jogging or using a trail could use the halfway house as well.
Bike trail there too.
Yeah. One story that I should say about the Friends, when we started the tournament, there were two purposes. One was to raise money, obviously. And the second was to develop a sense of awareness of what the Parks and Recreation really do. Don talked about diversity of programs, and I think a lot of people didn't realize the things that we really do provide for the city. So the idea was to, on different holes, to feature different programs that we had. One of the holes, and we still do today, in fact, the Jackson family sponsors this hole, is the wildlife discovery hole. Wildlife Discovery Center is one of our programs, started at the Recreation Center, expanded it now. But we'll have, Rob Carmichael brings out his animals, reptiles. We'll have a couple of alligators on the green, a couple of boa constrictors, and some other reptiles on the next tee. And it makes for a lot of great pictures and a lot of fun, and people remember that course. But one of the times I used to play with a fellow named Bubby Praise. Don knows well, we played well. He was the chief of police, probably the greatest athlete, by the way, ever to go to Lake Forest High School. But Bubby was definitely afraid of snakes. And so we were playing in a foursome, and I had Rob Carmichael give me a rubber snake. And the next to the tee is there's a box that's filled with sand, so people are supposed to take the sand and fill in their divots. So Bubby hit his shot, and I said, Bubby, make sure you fill in your divot, will you? You know, and so he went over, and I thought I was going to have to give him CPR. He just, and then I regretted that for the next 10 years because he reminded me of that in many different ways. Well, we had fun.
Well, anybody that's played Deerpath knows that the greens are small, they're hard to hit, and if you put reptiles on a green, you don't even want to hit them. So anybody that hasn't played that doesn't have that experience, but it's very intimidating to get close to that green, and you really want to pick up your ball and get to the next tee as quickly as possible. I'm glad you addressed the toboggan slide. We already have a question about that. And another question was about whether there was, you know, of any legal challenges, because there was an argument about whether a city golf course would cater too much to out-of-towners and not to residents. And does the golf course keep a ratio of out-of-town play as compared to community?
I don't know if it necessarily has a ratio that they live to, but they do charge an additional fee for non-residents for membership, for example. And for years, and now when you go out and play, I think you play for about the same fee. But for years, there was a significant difference between residents and non-residents. And a lot of the residents who felt that it was kind of their club, which it was, and that we tried to identify that as their club, didn't want any non-residents on the course, and keep pricing them out of the community. And we had to explain to them that, frankly, the non-resident revenue helps offset the cost of running the golf course, and in effect lowers the fee for residents as well. So, the choice is, if you want only residents running the course, the fee is going to be higher. So I think there were a lot of issues at the time about residents and non-residents that I had to deal with, but we gave priority to residents to signing up for permanent time, and the fee structure was such that it was less than non-residents, and that seemed to satisfy it. The golf course is run as an enterprise fund, as I said earlier. It is all the revenue has to cover all of the costs. We're not putting tax dollars into it. So it is important that we have things like non-resident fees, and we also need to have the junior program because it produces a lot of revenue for the course as well.
It looks, Fred, like there's a bright future. Do you have any? Can you look into the future and give us an idea of what you see in the next few years? Before I think we'll have a little time, Alex, to open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think, in summary, there's this theme that started in 1926 of philanthropy that has really made the golf course special. We have played a lot of the public golf courses around here, and I don't think there's any finer golf course than Deerpath, and it's going to continue to be that way. With the management of Kemper Sports, who have brought in a great greenskeeper and have good professionals running the course, I think the future is really bright, both from a program standpoint and from a maintenance standpoint. As long as it gets the continued support of the community and people realize that this is a major asset, like the beach, this is a major asset to the community. It's going to bring, I think, I heard the other night, there are like 1,000 new residents in the last year and a half. Those people need to know that there is a great public golf course here. And with the addition of the lawn, it will be the first of its kind. Some of the major courses in the world have this, but nobody around here. And then if we just have that continued tradition of philanthropy, things like the golf tournament, the Friends Golf Tournament, or people just donating. There was major donations made 2 years ago to really the clubhouse, and redid the whole clubhouse. The final one I'll make a plug for, if anybody's out there, the final piece on this master plan that we have is to have an indoor golf area so that we could have golf 12 months a year. People could have instructions or just go out and hit into a net. But that's probably about $1 million. So someone wants to donate that, we can do it through the Friends, and that will be probably the last piece of the master plan that we developed a few years ago. But it looks bright. There's lots of people out there. The youth is our future, the young people, and I'm looking forward to being here a few more years and playing there as well.
Well, I certainly hope so. And Fred, we want to thank you for this this history lesson. We all appreciate, anybody that lives in Lake Forest appreciates what a great asset the golf course is. And we're lucky to have your leadership throughout the years for all public recreation and how it helps. It helps everything about the city is enhanced by public recreation facilities. So with that, Alex, would you want to take over to facilitate questions?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you so much, Don. Thank you so much, Fred, for such a really interesting and entertaining conversation. At this point in the program, we have a few more minutes. So if you would like to put any questions in the chat bar, you may. You can address them to me if you would like me to moderate them, but also I think it would be okay if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask directly. Don, Fred, is that okay with you if people want to ask directly as well?
I'm having trouble reading the screen. Yeah, Bill Cascarano. It says Bill Cascarano was.
Or you can just
send
them in the chat to me, and we can go ahead.
You know, I mentioned Bill Cascarano was a pro I know when I was a kid. I bought my first golf shoes from Bill. And Don Kennedy was there for a number of years. Chris Marzellik was there for a number of years before Kemper Sports. Now, before that, the first pro back in whatever year it was, 26, was I think it's Mr. Norberg. The notes say was a highly recognized pro. How long he lasted, and the difference between 30s and 40s, I don't know. I haven't researched that. There's not a lot of records because, as Don said, it was the Parks Department, and then it was the Parks and Recreation Department, and the golf course itself had a lot of records. And I think a lot of stuff has unfortunately been disappeared. So we don't have a lot of great history on it.
We have a question from Barry Slee. If any famous people have played at Deerpath?
Chip Beck plays it all the time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Have any famous people
What, Alex, what did you say?
I was just reading off the question I think Don mentioned as well. Have any famous people played at Deerpath that you could discuss?
Well, Don Pierson played there.
Besides Mike Ditka, you mean?
Yeah, Mike Ditka played. Yeah. Mike McMahon and Jim McMahon, excuse me.
Steve McMichael.
McMichael, Steve McMichael, Hampton, all the Bears played there. Chip Beck has played there a lot, a professional golfer. And I'm sure, and Bill Weddington plays out there, former Bull. So I'm sure there are lots of people that.
Tony Kukoc played there.
Yeah, Tony Kukoc played there a lot too. He was a good golfer, very good golfer. So, so there are some sports celebrities, and I'm sure there were other people that kind of stuck on and played without us even knowing that they were famous. I think Don had said earlier that, or maybe it was a side comment, that there were a number of people who, good golfers who came in and played Deerpath because the greens are so small. They wanted to practice their game on a course that had small greens. So, so I'm sure there were a lot of people that we probably don't even know played there.
Any other questions? Again, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly. And you'll see I also put my email address in the chat box. So if you have any questions that you think of later, you can feel free to send them to me and I'll make sure that they get answered.
You haven't had any $1 million donations yet?
Not yet.
You know, there should be a plug for the History Center too, because you do a wonderful job. This is one example of a program, but if people haven't been to the History Center, you ought to go to the facility. It's fabulous. It's a great asset for the community, and ought to consider joining the History Center as well. A lot of neat programs that are coming up in the next month or so. So everything from visiting some of the big homes in Lake Forest to there was a program on an author on Cyrus McCormick Estate, and there's just a number of things. And plus, you can just get a lot of great information on yourself, on your family, and your home. You can research a lot of things. So it's a big asset to the community. Another one of those things that most people don't even know about. So encourage you to stop by.
Say, Fred.
Thank you, Fred. We really appreciate that.
John, it's John Ormsby. You just took me down a trip down memory lane. When Mary and I moved here in 1984, I had no place to play. So I went over there and introduced myself to the pro. And before I knew it, I had a regular tee time every Saturday, Sunday, and holiday. And I might mention, occasionally a few dollars would end up in my pocket. So I really enjoyed that. My question is, a little bit later in the year when I'm able, would you two guys want to play a little bit of golf? And if necessary, Fred, I'll caddy for you.
Okay.
You're on, John.
Yeah,
All right.
Get that broken hip taken care of, and we're not going to feel sorry for you, though.
Yeah, but that's worth 2 shots a hole. No, seriously, I'd like to hook up with you guys. This is very interesting. Very interesting. And by the way, back when I was a caddy, that's the first time I met hubby Hebgen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he used to make a lot of clubs. That was a big deal for him.
Yeah, I had some in my garage. I'm sorry I got rid of them.
Oh, boy. Oh, well. But thank you. You did a great job. Both you guys.
Thank
Don,
you.
Fred.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. And a special thank you again to Don and Fred for sharing these wonderful anecdotes. I still can't, I love the buried beer cooler story that just cracks me up every single time. And thank you, Fred, so much for those kind words about the History Center. Thank you all for coming out to support us this evening. We do have a lot of exciting programs coming up, especially tours, now that the weather is going to be hopefully warmer and nicer, fingers crossed. I do want to make a special plug for our Crabtree Farm Tour, which is coming up this Saturday. We still have many slots open for the morning, the 10 a.m. tour. It should be a really beautiful time of year. Tom Gleason just sent us some really cute pictures of lambs, and if that doesn't make you want to go over there, I don't know what will. We also have walking tours of the Lasker Estate coming up on May 27th, as well as our Lake Forest tour by bike, which will be happening on May 29th, I believe. And those are both very generously supported by Roland and Turnbow. So thank you for them to help us make those possible. And again, thank you all to you for showing up this evening. I know we get a little tired of Zoom calls, but we really appreciate the fact that you're all willing to continue to come out and listen to these really wonderful stories. And as Fred said, if you are not yet a member of the History Center, we strongly encourage you to check us out and consider joining. We have a lot of really great programs and a lot of really great perks for members. So we appreciate your consideration. And again, thank you all for coming out this evening. And thank you again to Don and to Fred for your time and your expertise and your lovely conversation.
Thank you,
My
Alex.
pleasure. Take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
I saw 35. It
35.
was up to 35, but